Hello, welcome to History B, Lesson 3. Today we're going to talk about groups in the historical sense. As you know, your essay has two themes, continuity and change, and the interaction of groups. As we go through the essay, you will talk about how the interaction of groups in certain events changed or continued the historical context of the period you are talking about. So once again, we'll review the essay structure. As I've been saying, the essay consists of an introduction, an historical context paragraph, definition of the issue, which the issue in our case is the interaction of groups. Then we have 3 paragraphs about change, 2 paragraphs about continuity, and a conclusion. We spoke about the historical context paragraph last week, and if you missed that, you can catch up by looking at the Moodle or on the YouTube channel. So today we're going to look at the definition of the issue, the interaction of groups. So the first step you have to take is to decide what historical period you're going to talk about. So you need 2 dates, and it should be a fairly long historical period because that just makes it easier to sort out what events you're going to talk about during that period. And once you've decided on your historical period, you have to write a paragraph on the historical context at the beginning of that period of time. And as we said last week, the historical context refers to the social, economic, political and cultural aspects of your place at the beginning of the historical period you're talking about. You also have to identify 2 or more groups who were significant during your time period. They can be groups who oppose each other, they can be groups that join together for a common cause, and you should define what their relationship is as you discuss them. So, for example, if you're talking about Mussolini's Italy at the beginning of the Mussolini period, the fascist era, you can talk about the interaction between socialist groups and fascist groups. Or you could talk about the interaction of Mussolini's party with the Vatican and the Pope and the Catholic Church. These are the sort of groups you can talk about. Now, the definition of group in the context of our essay, we can define it as a collection of people united by common cultural, political, social or economic values. So the group could be a political group, such as the Bolsheviks. The group could be a social group, such as peasants. The group could be a cultural group, so it could be a minority cultural group. It could be, if you want to do a class analysis, it could be the capitalists versus the socialists, which would be economic groups. So there are different types of groups you can look at. So let's look at historical context and certain groups as examples. So the French Revolution of 1789 was the period of time when the monarchy in France was overthrown by revolutionary groups. So if you wanted to write about the French Revolution, you could talk about the groups of the monarchists, and that's Marie Antoinette on the right, and the revolutionaries. And on your left, you have a sans-culotte, which was one of the women who knitted as the guillotine cut off the heads of the monarchists, basically. So if you wanted to talk about 2 groups during the French Revolution, you could talk about the revolutionaries and the monarchists. So if you want to talk about the revolutionaries and the monarchists during the French Revolution, you would select events from 1789 to the execution of the king, which was in 1790 something. And these events, when you write about these events, you talk about the interaction of the groups during these events. So let's look at the March on Versailles, which is when the revolutionary people marched on the Palace of Versailles and threatened the King and Queen of France. Or the execution of the King, where the revolutionaries tried and executed King Louis for crimes against the people. Then you would look at the results of these events and how they continued or changed the historical context of the time. Okay, so a sample paragraph structure is you describe the event and you say how it changed or continued the situation of each group and the historical context. So, for example, King Louis was executed by order of the National Convention and was led to his death by guillotine in January 1793. That's the event. This changed the situation of the royalists who are now subjects to the whims of the National Convention. It changed the situation of the revolutionaries as it consolidated their political power in France, and it permanently changed the course of French history because for the first time France was without a king. So let's look at the Russian Revolution. Once again, we can look at the relationship between the Bolsheviks, who were the revolutionaries, and the monarchists, who were the Tsarists. And that's Tsar Nicholas II on your left and Vladimir Lenin on your right. So once again, a sample paragraph structure is you describe the event and then you talk about how it changed or continued the situation of the groups and the historical context. For example, the October Revolution of 1917 started in St. Petersburg when Leon Trotsky led the Bolsheviks to seize strategic points in the city. This eventually led to the overthrow of Kerensky and the Democratic Parliament. It finally put the Bolsheviks in political power and led to the eventual death of the Romanov family and the violent execution and exile of several noble families. It also led to over 50 years of communist rule in Russia and permanent political change for peasants and workers in Russia. So in this step of writing the essay, you have to identify two groups which you will talk about during the course of the essay. You can answer the question about the groups on page 40 of the book, which will help you see what you have to talk about in terms of these groups. So the task really is to find two significant groups who played a part in changing or continuing the historical context you're talking about. I hope that's clear. Okay, so that's all I have to tell you this week. Next week, we will talk about change and continuity. Remember, you can contact me at any time if you want to on leanne.richards@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.